The cake was still on the table when my sister stood up and tapped her wine glass with a dessert fork. My son was 8 years old that afternoon. There were streamers on the porch and a chocolate cake with a race car on top and 14 children running through the backyard in the kind of joyful chaos that only exists for about 4 years of a person's life before self-consciousness sets in and ruins everything. I was standing near the kitchen doorway with a paper plate in my hand when my sister cleared her throat and smiled at the room and said very clearly that she thought everyone should know that Daniel and I were separating, that it had been coming for a while, that these things happen to the best of us. She said it like she was announcing a change in the weather. Welcome back to BetrayalLedger, where family secrets never stay buried for long. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe and join the family, because this story is one of the wildest ones we've ever told. Let's get into it. My name is Laura Hensley. I am 36 years old. In the afternoon, my sister chose my son's 8th birthday party to announce the end of my marriage to a room full of people who hadn't been told yet. She had absolutely no idea that 3 weeks earlier, I had signed the closing documents on the apartment building she had been renting in for 6 years. I need you to understand the kind of woman my sister Brooke is before I take you back to the beginning. She was not cruel in the way that leaves marks you can point to. She was cruel in the way that requires witnesses to confirm, the kind that happens in rooms full of people who are always just slightly too slow to register what they have seen. She was 39, 3 years older than me, with the particular confidence of someone who had spent her whole life being the first to arrive at every conclusion and the last to be held accountable for any of them. She had a talent for framing, for taking a fact and rotating it in the light until it looked like something else entirely. The divorce was not my private pain. In Brooke's hands, it became a piece of information that belonged to everyone in that backyard. Something to be distributed over wine and birthday cake before I had decided how to carry it myself. Our mother, Patricia Hensley, was sitting at the picnic table when Brooke made her announcement. I watched my mother's face go through 3 distinct expressions in about 2 seconds: surprise, recognition, and then the careful rearrangement that meant she was deciding which version of events she was going to support. My mother had been making that calculation her entire life, choosing the path of least resistance the way water finds the lowest point. And that path had almost always led her to Brooke. Not because Brooke was right. Because Brooke was louder and more present and had spent 39 years making sure that the space between herself and my mother contained no room for anyone else to stand. My father, Gary Hensley, had died 4 years earlier. Lung cancer, swift and deliberate. The kind that gives you 5 months between diagnosis and the end and spends most of those months reminding you that some things do not negotiate. He left behind a small life insurance policy, a paid-off house in Dayton, Ohio, and a workshop full of woodworking tools that still smelled like cedar and linseed oil the last time I opened the door. He also left behind a letter, one letter sealed, with my name written on the outside in his careful block handwriting, delivered to me by his attorney 3 weeks after the funeral. I will come back to that letter. It is the most important thing in this story. Daniel and I had been married for 9 years. We had met in graduate school in Ann Arbor, Michigan. 2 people who were good at the same things and made each other sharper at them for longer than most people manage. He was a structural engineer. I was a financial analyst. We had a house in a suburb of Cincinnati, with a yard big enough for a swing set and a vegetable garden. I tended every spring with the same methodical attention. I brought to spreadsheets and quarterly reports. We had Noah, who turned 8 the afternoon. My sister decided to make an announcement on his behalf. Without his knowledge or mine, the marriage had been dissolving for 2 years. Not dramatically, not with betrayal or screaming or any of the ruptures that make for easy storytelling. It dissolved the way some things do, quietly and at the edges first, and then steadily inward until one morning, you look across the breakfast table and realize that you have become 2 people who are very skilled at living in the same house and not much else. Daniel said it first. On a Sunday morning in February, with snow coming down outside the kitchen window and Noah still asleep upstairs, and I'd been thinking the same thing for 6 months before he found the words. We separated in February, told our attorneys in March, and had agreed to tell family together. Calmly, at a moment we chose. We had not yet chosen the moment. That was the part Brooke decided to handle for us. 6 months before the birthday party, I had lunch with my sister at a restaurant in downtown Cincinnati, a place with exposed brick walls and a seasonal menu and the kind of ambient noise that makes private conversations feel safer than they are. Brooke had suggested the lunch. She had an agenda, though she called it catching up. Brooke's catching up always had a purpose underneath it. something she was looking for, or something she was positioning. And the catching up was just the surface she moved across to get there. She asked about Daniel. I said things were fine. She tilted her head at the angle I had known since childhood. The angle of someone who already has the answer, and is simply waiting to see which version you will offer. She said she had heard from Mom that we seemed distant at Christmas. I said Christmas had been busy. She said of course, and lifted her water glass and looked at me, over the rim with the specific patience of someone who has decided to wait you out rather than push. What I did not know yet was that Brooke had already spoken to Daniel. Not secretly, nothing that required hiding, but in the way that required careful timing. She had run into him at a mutual friends gathering in January, 1 month before he said the words, out loud to me in our kitchen with the snow coming down. And Daniel, who was a decent man navigating something difficult without much practice, had been honest with her the way people are honest when they are tired of carrying something alone. He had said things were hard, that he was not sure where they were going. Brooke had taken that and filed it away in the careful, organized way she filed all useful information, in a place she could retrieve it from when the moment suited her. The letter my father left me was 4 pages long. Gary Hensley was not a writer. He was a man who built furniture in his workshop and communicated through presence. Through showing up on a Saturday morning with his truck to help you move something heavy without being asked. Through the way he listened without interrupting and nodded when he understood. 4 pages from him was the equivalent of a book from anyone else. He wrote slowly and clearly the way he cut wood, measuring twice before committing, and he said a number of things I will keep private because they belong only to me. But there was one section that was not private, that was practical and specific, and that I have thought about nearly every day since I read it sitting in his attorney's office in Dayton with November light coming through the blinds in thin, pale strips. He had been saving money for me since I was 22, not in a regular account, in a trust he had established with a lawyer named Gerald Watts, a quiet, unhurried man who had handled my father's affairs for 19 years and who sat across from me that November afternoon with the careful gravity of someone who understood the full weight of what he was delivering. The trust had been funded over 14 years from my father's overtime pay, from the proceeds of a rental property he had owned since the 90s, from the slow and patient accumulation of a man who worked with his hands and understood that the things you build without announcing them are the ones most likely to still be standing when you need them. The total by the time he died was $412,000. He had not told my mother. He had not told Brooke. He said so plainly in the letter, in the same steady block handwriting he used to label the drawers in his workshop. This is yours, Laura. I have watched you your whole life. You know how to take care of things. I sat in Gerald Watts' office for a long time after he handed me that letter. The room smelled like old paper and carpet cleaner, and the particular stillness of a place where important things happen without ceremony. I read the letter twice. I folded it back into its envelope. And I drove home on the Ohio highway with the landscape going gray and flat in the November afternoon. And I thought about my father and his workshop, with the smell of cedar and linseed oil. The careful way he measured before he cut. The way he had always seemed to know. Something about me that I was still in the process of understanding about myself. I did not tell Daniel about the trust. We were already fraying by then. Though neither of us had named it yet, I consulted my own attorney, a precise and unhurried woman in Cincinnati named Dana Forsyth, who had managed financial matters for me for 3 years, and who understood immediately what the trust represented and how to protect it correctly. The trust had been established before my marriage and structured, specifically as a separate property asset. Dana documented that position so thoroughly, and so completely that there was no version of events in which it became a point of negotiation. Not in the divorce proceedings. Not in any proceedings. 3 weeks before Noah's birthday party, I purchased an apartment building on Maple Street in Cincinnati. It was not an impulse decision. It was a decision I had been moving toward for 8 months. Since the January morning, I sat in Dana's office reviewing the trust documents and understood for the first time that my father had not just left me money. He had left me the means to build something. The building was 3 stories, red brick, 12 units, in a neighborhood that had been quietly improving for 4 years in the way that certain Cincinnati neighborhoods improve. Coffee shops first, then a hardware store renovation, then property valuations catching up to what the residents already knew. The previous owner was 67, retiring to Florida, and motivated to close before the end of the fiscal year. The price reflected that motivation. I paid $408,000. I kept $4,000 in the trust as a reserve. I signed the closing documents on a Thursday afternoon in Gerald Watts's office, with Dana on the phone from Cincinnati and a notary sitting beside me and the smell of old paper and carpet cleaner exactly as I remembered it from the November afternoon. The letter had first arrived. What I had not known when I began researching the building 8 months earlier was that one of its 12 units was occupied by my sister. I discovered it in February during the title search, when the tenant roster came through with names and unit, numbers and current lease terms. Unit 7B, Brooke Ann Hensley. Lease commenced 4 years prior. Monthly rent $1,400. $600 below market rate for that unit, because the previous owner had liked her and had never adjusted her rent to match the neighborhood's improvement. Brooke had told our mother she had found an incredible deal on her apartment through sheer resourcefulness. She had found a landlord who appreciated her and had never raised her rent. These were related but meaningfully different things. I sat with that information for 3 weeks. I did not call Brooke. I did not mention it to my mother. I did not discuss it with anyone except Dana, who looked at the tenant roster with the mild, professional interest of someone who has seen most things and said, quietly, that this was going to be an interesting building to manage. The afternoon of Noah's birthday party was warm for early May in Cincinnati. The kind of afternoon that feels like a reward after a long winter. Soft air and long golden light and the smell of cut grass and something flowering in the yard next door. I had spent the morning making a lopsided race car cake from a box mix because Noah had requested I make it myself, rather than buy one, and he had looked at it with the complete satisfaction of someone whose expectations are perfectly matched to the love behind the effort. Brooke arrived 40 minutes, late with a bottle of wine she had clearly purchased at the gas station on the corner and the particular energy of someone who had been planning their entrance. She kissed my mother on the cheek. She complimented the streamers, with just enough qualification in her voice to register without being quotable. She poured herself a glass of wine before the cake was cut, and she settled into the afternoon, with the ease of someone who had decided it was her party too. I was in the kitchen doorway when I heard the fork tap the wine glass. 2 clear notes. The backyard went quiet, the way it does when an adult makes a sound that means attention. Brooke smiled at the assembled parents and grandparents and the 14 children, who had momentarily frozen in their chaos, and she said she thought everyone should know that Daniel and Laura were separating, that it had been coming for a while, that these things happened. She said it warmly. That was the part I will never fully get past. She said it with the warm, practiced sorrow of someone who has been holding information for a long time, and is genuinely relieved to finally set it down in public. Noah was standing by the swing set. He was 8 years old and he had the expression children get when they hear something in adult language that their brain is still translating. I crossed the yard in 6 steps, put my hand on his shoulder, and told him we would talk about it later, just the 2 of us. And I moved him toward the cake table because 8-year-olds anchor themselves to something concrete when the ground shifts and cake is exactly concrete enough. I did not look at Brooke. I did not address what she had said. I cut the cake. I sang happy birthday with the other parents. I watched Noah blow out his candles with the focused, squinting intensity he brought to anything that mattered to him, and I thought about a building on Maple Street, with a red brick facade and 12 units and a parking lot that needed resurfacing and my name on the deed. The letter arrived at Brooke's apartment on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the party. It came from the property management company I had retained to oversee the building, a standard communication sent to all tenants regarding the change of ownership and the updated lease terms that would take effect at renewal. Her monthly rent would be adjusted to current market rate. That adjustment was $600 per month. The letter was professional, correct, and contained no personal information beyond what any tenant communication would contain. Brooke called me that evening. Her voice had lost every bit of its calibration. It was pulled thin and tight over something. Underneath that, I recognized as the specific, cold panic of someone who has just understood something they cannot go back to not understanding. She said, "Is this you?" I said the property management company handles all tenant communications. She said my name, just my name, the way people say a name when they have run out of the other words. I said I hoped the letter had given her sufficient notice to plan accordingly. I said I had to get Noah to bed. I said goodnight. I hung up and sat on my front porch in the quiet of the Cincinnati evening, the neighborhood settling into itself around me, the flowering tree dropping its white petals onto the porch boards, one at a time in the still air. The light was almost gone. Somewhere down the street, a screen door closed. A dog barked once and stopped. My father had written, near the end of his letter, that he had watched me take care of things, My whole life, and that he wanted to leave me, something that would take care of me in return. He had not been a man who used words lightly. Every word in those 4 pages had been chosen the way he chose wood for a project, for its grain and its density, and its specific capacity to hold whatever weight was going to be asked of it. He had understood exactly what he was doing. He had always understood. I went inside. I made Noah's cocoa, the kind with the small marshmallows he liked. And I sat on the edge of his bed while he told me about his birthday in the wandering, unhurried way of 8-year-olds who have not yet learned that stories need to be edited for other people's attention spans. The race car cake, the game in the backyard where someone made up a rule, halfway through and nobody could agree whether it counted. The friend who brought the wrong trading cards and was forgiven immediately, because that is what 8-year-olds do when they care about each other. They forgive immediately and move on and do not keep score. I listened to all of it. I did not rush him toward sleep. Outside, the white petals kept falling from the flowering tree in the yard. The building on Maple Street stood on its red brick foundation 3 miles away. 12 units and a parking lot, and my father's careful handwriting preserved in a safe deposit box at the bank on 5th Street. Some things your father builds with his hands. Some things he builds with 14 years of overtime pay and a trust document and 4 pages of block handwriting that say simply, "I have watched you your whole life. You know how to take care of things." He was right, I did.